Today, we are kicking off a brand new year, but not a brand new series. We decided next week we're going to start talking about peace in a series called Undisturbed, like I said earlier. But today, we decided we're going to take a week in light of this coming year and talk about what's ahead for you specifically, or maybe I should say how we see the year to come, the year that's ahead of us here. This might be a little bit different from what you're used to if you're used to hearing messages in a church, but what I can tell you is that me personally, not just in the area of my faith, but in every other area of my life, learning to think this way, in the way we're going to talk about today, and learning how to ask questions like the questions we're going to ask today, it has totally changed the way that I live my life. It probably could be a series in itself. And the great thing about this is that whether you have totally bought into everything we say about Jesus and God here or not, this could be extremely helpful for you. But if you do consider yourself a follower of Jesus, I think that this is essential to what we believe. So here's where we'll start, all right? With a question, of course. Change things up a little bit. Just kidding. What do you think that Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Serena Williams, Michael Jordan, Martin Luther King Jr., Jesus Christ, and the Apostle Paul all have in common? Think about that. I like to read biographies, try and get into the minds of the way people think. And I'm sure if you spent, enough time, you probably could come up with a few things that they have in common. But the thing for me that stands out about all these people is that they all seemed to have direction. They knew where they were going, right? They knew who they wanted to be or what they wanted to do. And sometimes both. Sometimes they knew who they wanted to be and what they wanted to do. And so their entire lives, they were headed in that direction. If they were blown off course, then they readjusted and they continued to head in that direction over and over and over again. They knew where they were going. So my question for you today, especially as we look at the next year, is where are you going? Have you thought about that? Have you thought about where you are right now in life or in a specific area of life and where you want to be and how you're going to get there? Sometimes this could come in the form of some people will say a mission, or having a vision of what the future could be like, or if you want to be, I'll have a vision of a certain kind of dad I want to be, and I think about it and dream about it and be like, okay, I want to be a dad. That's it. Or a certain kind of mother, or a certain kind of wife, or a certain kind of husband, right? Or they have some kind of picture that they visualize. They call it a vision of what they could be in the future. Or maybe it's even just a habit, right? I want to incorporate this habit into my life, or I want to incorporate this routine into my life. Or maybe it's a goals that you set in certain areas. But have you thought about where you are right now and where you want to be, where you're going? When I was younger, we used to go on these trips all the time. And we'd go to, Lancaster to see the Amish people, or Pennsylvania, or we'd go, Cape May. We'd always go someplace. It was always a lot of fun. I would always get really excited about it. But for me, the worst part was always the traveling experience. I just hated the trip. Whenever I found out where we were going, my first question always was, how long is it going to take to get there? Because I like to move, I'm like kind of fidgety, and it's like why I never sit in that stool, I'm always like on the go. And so to be like in a car, strapped in, and not be able to move for 6 hours is like torture to me. In school, I was always the kid that was in the bathroom 24/7 just because I wanted to get up and walk around. And so like travel is horrible for me. Now my mom is like the best person in the world to travel with because she is extremely prepared for any situation always. It's unbelievable, and she's got this bag and it's magic. It's just pure magic. Whatever you need, it's in the bag always. Always. It's crazy. And so, we'd be in the car and I'd be complaining and she'd be like, oh, you want this? You want like a puzzle, a game, like some protein powder, a mint, some pretzels, and it'd just keep coming out. It's like the Barney bag. If you ever watch Barney and then you're like, what are they going to pull out of that thing next? But eventually she gets to this point where she'd be like, all right. She'd look at me and she'd be like, okay, why don't you just close your eyes, take a nap, and when you wake up, you'll be where you want to be, And so sometimes I would do that. And that was amazing, It was like the closest thing we have to teleporting. You just close your eyes and boom, Hershey Park, right? So when I did that, it was great. It was, great advice. However, when it comes to life and where you want to be in life, it just doesn't work that way. You will never arrive on accident. We do not drift in the direction of health or of growth. It's not natural to us, right? You ever hear someone say they let themselves go, right? Typically, people don't let themselves go and have this fantastically positive result. As soon as you decide, no matter what area of life it is, I stopped trying there. It's never like better. It's because we don't naturally go in that direction. And so it's extremely important for us to give some real thought to where we are, define where we want to be, and figure out how to get there. Like I said earlier, if you're not someone who considers himself a church person, if you're like, okay, I'm not bought into this could still be really helpful for you. I recently read that having some concept of what you're trying to achieve and gradually making progress toward that is essential to our internal well-being. Like, no matter whether you define it or not, but you have some concept, okay, I kind of want this, and you're moving, it's essential. As soon as you feel like you're not, or there's nothing you're going after, we get to a place of hopelessness. It's extremely unhealthy. But if you're someone who considers yourself a follower of Jesus, like we can't afford to not do this. We believe in a process, get ready, it's a big one. It's a process called sanctification, which is really, it's a fancy word for saying, like spiritual growth. It literally means to be like more holy, to be made holy, to be more like Jesus. And so we believe that we should be constantly, if you're someone who follows Jesus, constantly taking steps toward becoming more and more like him. And so if we really believe that, then how can we not take time to think, okay, well, in this area of life, here's where I am, and here's where I want to be, right? So let me ask you this, especially if you're a church person. Right now, are you more or less compassionate than you were 1 year ago? Are you more or less forgiving than you were 1 year ago? Are you more or less patient than you were 1 year ago? This has been a tough year, right? And so if your answer to that is like less, that's understandable. It's been nuts. But it's so important that we understand where we are. In fact, I would say, like, let's say there's a scale, right? Let's talk about patience. And there's like some spectrum or scale. And over here is like just, the picture of patience. Perfect, fantastic. Like Jesus, like patience, nothing rattles you, totally just cool all the time, right? And then over here, there's like, like complete jerk. I have no time for you, zero patience, right? And I'm somewhere on this spectrum. I don't know, you decide where I am. But I honestly think, if you were to look at me now versus me like last year, I honestly think over the past year, I think I've taken a step in the wrong direction. I think I'm a little less patient than I was last year. But I think it's important that we realize that. One of my good friends told me recently, he was like, I have heard myself say things I know I would not have said a year ago. And when he said that, I didn't say this, I wish I did, but immediately I thought like, that is so healthy. The fact that you know where you are compared to where you want to be. It's essential to who we are and how we believe we should be living. And so, where are you going? And where do you want to be? I mentioned earlier the Apostle Paul on that little list of people who, had some direction, who knew where they were going. He knew who he wanted to be and what he wanted to do. And here's how he said this. He said this in a letter that he wrote to a church in Philippi. He was actually in prison at the time when he was writing this. He says this. He says, I want to know Christ, Jesus. He says, yes, to know the power of his resurrection and participation in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death. Another translation says, my determined purpose is to know him. The idea here is what he wants, his aim, his objective is to become more and more like Jesus. Now, if you're not familiar with those words, that can be a little bit clunky here. But what he's saying is like, okay, you know how Jesus came back from the dead, that kind of power, that kind of strength? I want to know personally that strength. I want to understand Jesus, not like knowledge, like book knowledge, but knowledge like relational knowledge. That's what this word know means. Even in his sufferings, he's like, I want to become more, even through the things that are hard for me, I want those things to help me to become more and more like Jesus. Whether I'm alive or not, like no matter what's happening, that is my focus. That's who I want to be. He had this picture of who he wanted to be. And so he would write in his letters to other people, he would say, follow me as I follow Jesus, because that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be like that. He had this picture of who he was trying to be. And he would say, this is in Philippians chapter 3. You can read it for yourself if you want. Right after this, he elaborates a little bit and he says, like, I haven't attained this yet. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not there yet, but I am pressing on in this direction. He says, forgetting what's behind and looking forward towards what's ahead. I press on toward the goal of becoming like this. Like, this is where he was going. This is what he was trying to do. The great thing about Paul, he wrote all these letters in the New Testament, and we get this little like snapshot often of what's going on in his mind. And this is one of these moments. This is who he wants to be. And what he taught is that this is what followers of Jesus should want to be. In fact, he says in his letter, he says, those of you who consider yourselves like spiritually mature should go after the same thing. Should press on toward that goal of becoming that way. But if we're going to do that, we need to know where we are and where we want to be. And so that was his concept of who he wanted to be, right? But he also had this concept of what he wanted to do. And this was unique to him. Here's what he says. He says, it has always been my ambition. Another translation says, my aim. Like how you'd aim at a target. He says, it's always been my ambition to preach the gospel, literally to share good news where Christ was not known, where no one knew about Jesus, so that I would not be building on someone else's foundation. This is what I'm trying to do. Now, this wasn't for everybody. This was just him. He believed that because of his experiences, the way he saw the world with his gifts, his skills, his talents, he believed he was uniquely suited to tell people about Jesus who had never heard about him before. And he's like, that's what I'm setting out to do. There were other people who went to the religious community who had heard about Jesus but didn't believe. And there were other people that would just try to convince them that they were wrong and that Jesus really was somebody who he said he was. And Paul, though he did start here, eventually was like, no, actually, that's not like my thing. I think I'm gonna go to people who have never heard before. And that led him, it allowed him to make decisions in every other area of life. Like when you look back at his life, you see this is what caused him to travel all around the known world, starting these churches where there had never been churches before. And it was because he knew not just what he wanted to be, but he knew what he wanted to do, what he wanted to accomplish. And like I said, this isn't necessarily for everybody, but this is him. Based on his unique skills, abilities, talents, interests, this is what I feel like I should be doing. And because of those two things, this is what's been most helpful for me. Because he had direction when it comes to who he wants to be and what he wanted to do, he also had an extreme sense of clarity. And this is clarity, it is one of my new favorite words. Right now, a lot of us are lacking clarity, right? It's clarity, it makes things easy. Anybody suffer from paralysis by analysis, where it's just so hard to make a decision? Especially when it's two good decisions, should I go here, should I go there? Should I go to this school, should I go to that school? Should I study this or study that? Should I marry him, should I break up with him? Pros and cons, you make the pros and cons list, and it's having direction helps all the pieces fall into place. It helped him to make decisions, and it can help us make decisions as well. I read about this interview with the CEO of Southwest Airlines. And the interviewer was sitting down with him and said, so what's it like to be CEO of Southwest Airlines? It's gotta be really hard, you're managing all these people, all these decisions, lots of money, a lot of aircrafts and whatever. And he said, no, actually it's very easy. What do you mean? He said, we have a very clear mission, direction. He said, we want to be the low-cost airline. That's it. That's what we want to do. And that's how we make all our decisions. He said, let me give you an example. The head of marketing walks in and says, studies have shown that people want chicken in their salad on the flights. Should we put chicken in our salad on the flights? And he says, will that make us the low-cost airline? And she says, no, I don't think so. And he says, okay, no chicken in the salad. And that's the end of that. Having clear direction helps all the pieces fall into place. And we see this in the life of Paul. Paul got really close with a bunch of people in a city called Ephesus. They loved him. He loved them. They developed these really strong relationships. But there came a time where he was like, all right, I'm leaving. And no one wanted him to leave. Now, like I mentioned before, he really wanted to tell people about Jesus where no one knew about Jesus. And he wanted to do it in Rome because Rome was the epicenter of the world. And not just in Rome, but he wanted to get before Caesar himself. He's like, if I could get to Caesar, man, forget it. This thing's gonna explode. And so he's really shooting for the moon, right? Swinging for the fences. That was his goal. That's how he wanted to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. And he was going after that. And so there are these people that are like, oh, but it's so great here in Ephesus. Just stay with us. We love you. They're crying. And he's like, no, I'm sorry. I gotta go. This could be a really good thing. I could be Pastor Paul in the church in Ephesus, and that could be the end of my story, but I have someplace to go. It gave him a filter for looking, for making his decisions. Another time, somebody came up to him, and this prophet came up to him and said, if you leave, you're gonna be tied up. You're gonna go to prison. They're gonna put you in chains. So you better not leave. And he was like, all right, well, they might do that, but I've got someplace to go. And this guy was right. He actually was chained and tied up, but he had someplace to go. And even if it was going to be hard, he knew what he came to do. He knew what he felt like he was supposed to accomplish, and so he went. Jesus himself dealt with the same thing. He said very clearly, he said he came to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. To serve and to give his life. And so you might be familiar with the Last Supper, when Jesus is with like his best friends or having a meal. It's a big holiday dinner, you know. And it's like, well, what are we going to do at this Last Supper? They could have gone around and had a big encouragement circle for Jesus and all share like Jesus' greatest hits, you know, their favorite moments with Jesus and be like, oh, you're so... But that's not what happened. Like Jesus knew he came to serve and he wanted his followers to remember that. And so he got on the ground. He started washing their stink, nasty feet. It's not like our feet, which are, you know, for the most part, no offense, probably gross, but they're like walking in these dirt roads that animals, you know, go to the bathroom on, and he's like, no, because I came to serve, and I want them to remember that. And so he filtered his decisions through that. You know, like very practically, Jesus never got married, never bought a house. You know, there's probably a number of reasons why, but one reason was probably that he knew he wasn't going to need it. He knew he came to give his life. He knew he wasn't going to be around for a long time. And so it helps us to filter all of our decisions. For us as a church, right, we say, you might have heard me say this before, we say we want to be a church for people who don't normally go to church. And so that informs every decision we make. We have coffee here downstairs for a number of reasons. One is so that like you can stay awake while I'm up here talking. But the other reason why is because, you know, if you've never been in church before and we like ask you to stand up and sing, it's kind of nice to have something to do with your hands, you know, to just like, rather than just like, right? And so it can be comfortable. And along those lines, like we also had to decide what kind of carpet we were going to get in here. We decided to get carpet tiles. Why? Because we allow people to bring coffee in here. And so if somebody spills their coffee, we pull up a tile and we put another one down, we throw it away. It has helped us so much make decisions. And when somebody comes up to us and says, hey, I don't really like the way you do that, or what, it's very easy to explain, well, here's why. And though it may not be their favorite, or often even our favorite, we're doing it because we have direction. And so when it comes to your own personal growth, right, what I have found is that it is easiest and most effective to make a change when you focus in one area, right? Like where you are in one area and where you want to be. And you can allow that to inform your decisions. I read a story about a guy who, his name is Bob Goff, and he wanted to be more patient. He just realized he wasn't patient enough or as much as he wanted to be. And so he decided, I don't get the logic behind this, by the way, but he decided he was going to carry around a metal galvanized bucket everywhere he went for a long time, like days and days. And that was going to be his reminder. I don't understand the logic behind that, but I respect it, you know? He's like, every time I see this bucket and every time someone asks me about the bucket, it's going to be a reminder that I need to be more patient. I'm going to try and fill my life with patience like I want to fill this bucket with patience. Like do even crazy things because he had some direction. I read another book with this guy who always felt like he was in a hurry. He wanted to like calm things down in his life. And so he decided he was going to, every time he goes to the grocery store, he's going to find the longest line and go on that one. And I read that and I was like, oh my gosh. That just stresses me out, just like thinking about it, you know? I like do all my shopping at places that are open 24 hours. So I could go at like 5 a.m. and no one's there, you know, wait on 0 lines. And he's like, I'm going to intentionally search out the longest. But it informed, his direction informed his decision. It gives him clarity. There was a year in my life when I was in college, my early years in college, where I was like, you know what, this year, I need to figure out what I believe. I need to figure out if I'm really into this or if I'm not. I don't want to be in the middle of the road, like sometimes feeling like, well, maybe I should do a little bit more. Maybe like my parents would guilt me into going to church, or maybe like really figure this out. And so there are a lot of things I could have learned. There was a lot of things I could have done with my free time. But in the beginning of the year, I was like, you know what, I just got to figure this out. And so that year, that's what I did. that informed the books that I read, the things that I watched, the things that I listened to. The better, the more clearly you can give yourself direction, whether it's big direction like life direction or even small direction. The easier it'll be to make decisions. And the more clarity you'll have, not just in decisions, but in setbacks. This guy, Paul, that we're talking about, I told you, he was arrested. He was in chains, and he was trying to get to Rome, right? He wanted to get before Caesar. That was his goal. He wanted to share his message to Caesar because that's how he felt like it would go the first. But he got arrested. And so he's like, okay, well, now what do I have to do? Because my plan just got all jacked up. And so he gets chained to these guards, and he writes in one of his letters, he's like, hey, just so you know, I want you to know that this whole thing has actually worked out for the good of what I'm trying to accomplish here. The entire palace guard now knows like my message. He will not close his mouth. He was probably literally chained to a guard like 8 hours a day. And so it's as if he's saying like, yes, okay, initially I was trying to go this way from here, but then I was thrown off. Now I'll go this way from here. And so his method changed, but his mission doesn't, and it's all because he had some kind of direction. A lot of times, like when there's a setback, especially in the life of a younger person, if you have no concept of who you want to be and of what you want to do, when there's a setback, something you didn't expect that messes up your plans with no direction, that can very quickly lead you to a place of hopelessness where it's like, well, what am I even doing? Why am I even here? Having some kind of direction, no matter how vague or specific, big or small, it is essential. It is essential, not just to our spiritual growth, but to our sense of well-being, of knowing what we're shooting for. And so my question for you is, where are you going? Where are you going? When I was younger and I would hear people talk about stuff like this, I'd always get overwhelmed. I'd be like, oh, like I don't have a mission statement for my life. I don't have some vision of what I want to do. And it would just be like, and I would meet some people. I'd be like, oh, I know, I've been called to Africa and I'm going to go there. I'm going to start this and, I'm going to write this book while I'm there. And I'm like, how do you know that? And it would be like, it must be so nice to know what you do. So it would be overwhelming. Maybe you feel that a little bit like, no, I don't have even if you start like small, very, very small. Like what I want to accomplish this year. Where do I want to be at this time next year, even just in one area of life? You ask yourself 3 questions. Where am I right now? Where do I want to go? And how am I going to get there? Those 3 questions. So maybe you take a minute to really think, like, what's an area of life where I am needing growth, where I'm dissatisfied, right? Maybe it's the way you communicate in your marriage. I'm dissatisfied with it. And I want to get to a place where I'm communicating better. And so how am I going to get there? Right? Maybe it's something with your physical health. Maybe it's something in your spiritual life, in your own faith journey. But the question is like, where am I dissatisfied? Like really needing growth, even if it's just one area, one small area. Where do I want to be and how do I get there? Last year for us, for my wife and I really took some time to think, okay, like where are the issues? The sources of stress, the sources of tension in our relationship, in my life, like what really throws things off? And what I realized was that a lot of it came back to finances. We were having like a lot of financial discussions in my house. We had a lot of disagreements over what we were gonna spend money on, like the dryer would break and it would be this whole big thing or whatever. And so what we decided to do, like what I decided to do last year is just like, okay, you know what? Like if we get just a better handle on finance, a lot of other things might fall into place. And so I just decided last year that I wanted to become more financially literate. That was it. That was my goal. And so I just started reading books about finances, and I was exposed to little habits, little things that just give you margin, just like a little bit of breathing room. And so many other things fell into place after that. This year, like right now, like what I've realized is that a lot of times I go home and I have nothing left in the tank, and so my family gets just like my crankiness, like bare minimum. And that's not, I don't want, my kids to grow up and be like, oh yeah, my dad was real nice when he was at work, but then he came home and he was a monster, You don't know the real version of him. And so like really, I spent some time like thinking, okay, here's where I am. I don't like this. And I know I want to be here. What's the path here? And so for me, it just means having a routine. Knowing at like in the morning, right? Until 11 o'clock, I'm going to spend that time preparing for Sunday. And then after that, there's going to be a block where I have meetings. And after that, there's going to be a block where I just check things off my to-do list. And so there's the create, the meet, and the execute time. And if I don't finish what I want to do in the morning, well, I just end it at 11 o'clock. And maybe I'm a little behind in one area, but the wheels don't fall off everywhere else. And then I could go home and hopefully like have a little more for my family. Right? It is so important, whether you are on the faith bus or not, to know where you are and where you want to be and how to get there. Maybe this year you need to develop a habit. Maybe you need to go home a little earlier. Maybe you need to spend more quality time with the people you love. Maybe it has something to do with your physical health, your emotional health, right? I would highly recommend that you are at least aware of how much time you spend watching the news and on social media. It's undisputed now that those two things are detrimental to your mental health. So I'm not saying don't be uninformed, but at least know, okay, today I spent 7 hours listening to the news, right? Like little things like that. And maybe you put something in your life just to structure that. Maybe you need to make a big decision. Maybe this is the year you figure out what you believe about all this. And just decide, at this time next year, I want to know. Am I going to be one of those people that's into God and church or not? So I'm going to start asking questions. Maybe for you, this is the year where you really want to start taking things a little more seriously. Maybe you decide every day you're going to spend a little bit of time, 5 minutes a day, praying and reading something that strengthens your faith. You would be amazed to see how a habit like that could cause a ripple effect in so many other areas of life. Maybe this is the year where you have to make a tough choice. Maybe you don't need a start doing list. Maybe you need a stop doing list. Right? Maybe this is the year you finally have to end that relationship. You have to break up with that guy or that girl that you shouldn't be with. Right? Maybe this is the year you decide you want to get baptized. Maybe this is the year that you make a decision that you look back on and you realize, I wouldn't have done that if I didn't decide at least a little bit who I wanted to be and where I wanted to go. I'm going to ask the band to come back up here, and here's what I'll leave you with. So it's kind of cool. At the end of his life, Jesus prays, and we have a record of this prayer. And he says in his prayer, imagine this. He says in his prayer, I have finished the work you've given me to do. Just imagine being able to say, done, right? How nice that would feel. The Apostle Paul, the guy we were just talking about, said something very similar. He was writing a letter to Timothy, who was his apprentice. And he said, this is at the end of his life, he says, I've fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I've kept the faith. Saying the same thing. I've done what I came to do. And Paul did. He accomplished his mission. We're here today, probably because of what Paul did. And like, just imagine how good it would feel to have something you set out to do and know that you did it. My guess is that probably none of us will ever be in a place where we're like, done, right? But what if, like, next year, at this time next year, you could look back at a decision you made today, or maybe this week, and say, you know what, last year, my husband and I figured out that we needed to communicate better. And so we took these steps. And look where we are now. Or I figured out I wanted to get this area of my life in order. Or that was the day I decided that I wanted to take my faith more seriously, or at least find some answers for myself. And so I did this and that and this, and look where I am now. Could you imagine like how satisfying that would be to just know you had some direction? You knew where you were going, and to look back and recognize the progress that you've made over a year. What if we did that? What if we were a little bit more intentional about how we spent this year?